divided in our dance party for today. Do you know what we're celebrating today? After more than 900 days, Governor Jay Inslee is giving up his emergency powers.
I'm confident now that we have reached a significant milestone in the COVID effort. We are now in a position to be able to continue our efforts against COVID in multiple ways without the necessity of an emergency order.
Which of course means starting today, we're no longer in a state of emergency.
I'm announcing today that the emergency declaration will lapse on October 31st.
Oh. So he's going to give up his emergency powers just before the midterm election, more than a month from now. Okay, well, at least he's given us a date as to when he's going to give them up. And on the plus side, that must mean that all the masking business is behind us, right?
We're going to continue to use the tools that are at our disposal that do not necessitate an emergency order, including wearing masks under people's decision as appropriate.
That's great. So he's going to finally leave it up to us as to whether we want to wear a mask or not, including those reporters that are sitting in the room masked up right in front of him?
Will we have to wear masks after October 31st to sit in this room with you?
I doubt it, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, but the vaccine mandate for state workers, that's definitely done, right?
We're moving to an incentive-based effort on the boosters, but you will have to have a vaccine to be in state employment, including new employees.
Yeah, but you must be mistaken, Governor. You see that the initial vaccine, if employees got it last year and didn't get a booster, well, the initial vaccine probably isn't effective anymore anyway. So surely you're not going to keep the initial vaccine mandate in place when you're not mandating boosters, because that just wouldn't make any sense. So certainly you misspoke there.
Does that mean, they got the vaccine, a year ago? Is it still effective?
That would fulfill the obligation, and we then would count on our incentive programs to incentivize them to go with the booster requirement.
With the employees who were fired or quit because they wouldn't get the most up-to-date vaccine at the time, that's a different treatment, isn't it, of the employees going forward who work for the state?
So I'll try it again. To be in state employment, you will have to have a vaccine against the COVID, whether it was early or late, you will have to have had a vaccine. That does not necessitate that it be the booster. We will use the incentive program to incentivize people to get the booster because it's effective and it's safe. And I hope people will use it. But we'll use an incentive program rather than the requirement.
Okay, but surely if we have to stay in a state of emergency around COVID-19 until October 31st, surely the governor is going to be here with us during this emergency period of time.
I will be going to Finland, Sweden, and Norway beginning next week on a mission to continue to work with these countries to advance our high-tech economies. We'll be particularly focused on the ability to advance our clean energy economy.
Okay, changing gears. This is very serious, so changing gears. Party's over. Have you guys read this story about this Las Vegas journalist who was killed? This is just an insane story, and the twists and turns. So Jeff German, investigative reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, was found stabbed to death outside his home. And I think initially, that's horrifying. You don't want anyone to lose their life. But initially I was thinking, well, maybe it was random, that the chances that it's related to someone's reporting just seemed, like something out of a movie. But in fact, it did not take long for investigators to tie Jeff German's murder to his reporting and arrest an elected official in Clark County, Robert Tellis. Apparently, German had done some reporting on Mr. Tellis, who had been the Clark County public administrator. He just had recently lost in his primary election, so he wasn't going to be able to be reelected. But he had written about Tellis for having, an inappropriate relationship with a female staffer, just kind of fostering a hostile work environment. I don't think the stories weren't anything like insane. I mean, when you talk about the possible depths of corruption, these were, again, sort of it seemed like office issues, inappropriate relationship, hostile work environment. But anyways, this story just rapidly turned into this insane storyline where, I think there were some people who Jeff German worked with who were trying to help authorities figure out, okay, could this be tied to his reporting? And then pretty quickly, they zeroed in on Robert Tellis. He owned a vehicle that matched the description of a vehicle that was seen outside Jeff German's home. They go to Tellis's house, they serve a search warrant, and then they went back armed to the teeth to arrest this guy. And it seems like this was some sort of act of retribution for the reporting that maybe this elected official thought cost him his job. He didn't get reelected as a result of it. So by any stretch, the details of the story are incredibly sad. And to see this reporter who was really, he was 69 years old. A lot of people would be retired by then, but this is clearly a job that he just absolutely loved. And I think it highlights the danger that journalists face, not only abroad. We've seen, obviously war correspondents and the danger that they're in, but also domestically, to a lesser extent, reporters who've been assaulted during riots and protests. But this, to be murdered allegedly for your reporting is absolutely horrifying. But all of that aside, and the tragedy of it aside, Fox News pointed out something that I thought was a really good point when we talk about the way that the media covers things differently depending on, who's involved. Fox News pointed out that the other major networks did not mention that Robert Tellis was a Democrat. Fox News saying ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC didn't mention Tellis's political affiliation when reporting on this. Now, I tend to believe that that doesn't matter. The fact that he's a Democrat doesn't have anything to do with whether he's capable of murder. He's clearly just a clearly deranged individual, allegedly. But, so again, just on its face, I don't see the point in saying it was a Democrat, right? Now, I feel that way. However, if this were a Republican who killed a journalist, do you believe that outlets like ABC, NBC, MSNBC would have mentioned that it was a Trump supporter or a Republican who supported the former president who was very critical of the media? You bet they would have mentioned that it was a Republican. I have no doubt that they would have mentioned that it was a Republican. So while I don't believe that there's a necessity to mention political party unless there's some sort of larger relevance to the issue, I don't disagree with Fox News in this instance, that had this been a Republican, it obviously would have been tied to the story. And I welcome anybody who disagrees with me on that front. But it also goes to skin color. So oftentimes when there is an officer-involved shooting or something like that, they'll mention the color of the officer and the skin color of the person who they killed, unless it's, say, a black officer who killed a white suspect or a white individual. And this is a very clear pattern. So, I understand to a certain extent when we're talking about race and policing in America, if it's a white officer who killed a black man and there's now a lot of public outcry over it. But inherently, when you're mentioning skin color in one instance, but not other instances, you're focusing on a clear narrative. And I don't know that the media does this intentionally. I think it's almost like automatically programmed into them. If it's a black suspect, you need to make sure to say the race. If it's a white officer, you need to make sure to say the race. In this case, if it's a Trump Republican who committed an act of violence, you better say that he was a supporter of the former president or that he's a Republican. But if it's a Democrat, well, that detail is insignificant. Again, I do believe that it's insignificant. I think this is probably just a very mentally deranged man, regardless of political party. But I have to agree and I have to believe that leaving out political party would not have happened if the shoe was on the other foot. It's Friday. That means it's time for our segment, Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Joining us is our Florida-based correspondent, my sister Miranda, who's having a very bad day because the AC went out on her car and it's very hot in Florida and she wants me to know that her life is very dramatic.
My day and my hair is ruined.
That's all right. You still look pretty. All right. So LGBTQ issues we know have been a whole ordeal in Florida. There was the thing that the media called the Don't Say Gay bill, even though it was the Florida Parental Rights and Education Act. But anyway, so this came to a head at a Miami school board meeting. What were they deciding on?
They were deciding on something, I mean, kind of surface level in my opinion, but they were deciding on whether or not to recognize LGBTQ History Month in schools. So ABC News reports that Miami School Board votes against recognizing the LGBTQ History Month in a 1-8 vote. I don't know. I don't have kids, so it's hard for me to have an opinion on this.
This is what I was thinking too, is I really don't know how I feel about this. I just tend to think that, you know, you can teach about things like the Stonewall riots, the Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage. I just don't know that the necessity of having like a whole month at school around celebrating Pride and you know what that it would entail, I guess. I mean, for kids who are LGBTQ or for parents who want their kids to celebrate that month, there are a million ways they can do that outside the classroom. So I guess I'm not very bothered by this.
Yeah, I'm not too bothered by it either. I mean, I don't think it should make it so kids cannot celebrate it on their own terms during that month if they like, or share with friends or whatever have you. But I think even when I was in school, I thought that like even Thanksgiving celebrations lasted too long in school, and Christmas, like you're like whole months of celebrating certain things, and anything that's going to be distracting to kids, whether like kids get too excited about it or they don't care or it creates debate, maybe you should just leave it out of the schools and altogether, so it's just not a distraction.
Yeah, if it's controversial and distracting, and Florida, they've already had a lot of controversy around this issue. So I guess the only part of it that surprises me is Miami. I guess it seems like a city where the school board would vote in favor of that, but maybe I'm just misrepresenting the city.
Yeah, I think there's two different parts of most cities. There's the people who live in the cities and have families in the cities and have children that go to schools in the cities. And then there's maybe young adults who move to the cities to work. There's people who've lived there, maybe they don't have children. I think there's definitely different levels. So when you look at Miami in kind of like a social, young adult, young professional aspect, Miami is an extremely open place. You know, we have a lot of gay bars. We have an amazing drag community. So Miami isn't not welcoming of this community by any measure. I think that Miami is far in removed from the Miami of public schools and parents and things like that. I think it's a totally different conversation with a whole different group of people.
Yeah, and they also have a huge Latino community, which there's a heavy Christian base in the Latino community that might not be too thrilled about this. So that's interesting. I'm curious what people watching think. Comment on this episode whether you think it's a big deal if schools celebrate Pride Month or recognize it or not. Okay, the next one. We've been talking about how, Florida is experiencing shortages of workers in certain sectors, much like the rest of the country. We talked about Ron DeSantis getting really creative with trying to fill their teacher shortage with, former law enforcement or military folks, I believe it was. And now there's an idea being floated to deal with the shortage of corrections workers.
Yeah, so Florida National Guard could come in to help at short-staffed prisons. Our state continues to struggle with a shortage of corrections officers. A legislative panel last week considered a plan, and they will consider it again next week and put it to a vote on whether or not to have active Florida National Guard members help out at these short-staffed prisons while they try to fill what looks like thousands of open positions to help bring those numbers back up to an operating level.
To me, this is a really appropriate use of the National Guard. In Washington, we used the National Guard during the pandemic for all sorts of things, helping at food banks, helping at vaccine sites. I mean, we used them during the 2020 riots in Seattle. They're there for an emergency. And if you have short staffing at a prison, that's an emergency because it can be incredibly dangerous. And so I like this idea. I'm sure there's some Guard members who would love that kind of experience, because they're citizen soldiers. So this is just so creative. You guys are so creative down there.
We are very creative, very resourceful. I mean, there are a lot of useful people like just waiting for an opportunity to fill in a gap and to get in where they fit in. And I think a lot of states and a lot of cities could probably take like that example and go with it, because everybody's got National Guard just on reserve waiting around. And it's a beautiful thing to not have a natural disaster to have to use them at, but like that doesn't mean that we don't have short staffs or like the pandemic and just different reasons to put them into action.
Yeah, get them creative. And I mean, yeah, we use them this time of year for wildfires a lot. And so, you'd have to make sure that you have enough depending on what other emergencies you have going on. But I love this. Let's end with a Florida man story, which might be the most epic Florida man story of all time.
I have to agree with you. This is a pretty on point Florida man story. Fox News reports Florida man survives 3 days in swamp after losing arm in alligator attack. And he says, do or die. A Florida man, Eric Murda, 43, he had just finished an irrigation job in northern Florida when he decided to stop at a lake fish camp to throw away some trash at the facilities there. This resulted in him getting lost in the woods. He wandered around, and then at one point he could see his truck from across a body of water, and he decided it was quicker to go through the water and take a swim. And halfway across the lake, Gator grabbed him by the arm.
She grabbed the outside of my arm like this, and I grabbed her. So I didn't want her rolling over on me because I already knew about that. She snapped my arm backwards, and then she dragged me under 3 times.
He just fought him off until he was able to get him to let go, and drove himself to shore and survived in the swamp with all types of impending, gator attacks and mosquitoes. And I can't imagine this. The Everglades are a really rough place to be.
It's do or die. Do you want to live? Do you want to die? I was given the opportunity to make a choice. And obviously I chose to live.
And he survived 3 days. They found him. He doesn't have an arm anymore, but he says that he has a whole new sense of purpose, and he is going up and nothing can bring him down. And that's what he said.
Okay, first of all, obviously he's a badass. Maybe not the brightest bulb to swim across any body of water in the Everglades, but I'm going to...
Or just in Florida in general, if you guys visit here, just stay away from the water. If you're not 100% sure that there's no gators in it, just don't go find out on your own. Just don't do it, because there's a lot of stories of people walking their dogs near water, kids, all grown people getting yanked into the water by gators. They live here and they're better at water than we are. So
you heard it on Florida Report. Gators are better at water than you are. All right, Miranda. That guy's a legend. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good weekend.
And that has been our segment, Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Every Friday, we do a segment called Friday with Friends, where I invite an interesting friend on to talk about their life or their career. Many of you watching will know Simone del Rosario. She and I worked together very closely when I was at Fox 13, covering government and politics and the riots in 2020. Well, Simone has since moved on from Fox 13 as well and transitioned into covering the economy, which is obviously a very fascinating subject matter right now. So I invited her on the show to talk about what she's been up to. Simone, welcome to Fridays with Friends. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so good. I'm so happy to be with you.
Do you miss Seattle? How's the Big Apple?
I miss Seattle every time someone's talking about how good the weather is. A friend just asked if she could lay on my roof in our Seattle house this weekend. Apparently it's supposed to be nice. So I miss it in times like that, but I love New York, and Seattle's home, but this is a really good adventure right now.
Yeah, I went a few months ago to New York and got to see you. I mean, I really went to see your dog, but I saw you in the process of seeing Rookie. But New York, it gets a bad rap, but honestly, I just found it nicer to walk around in than Seattle, sort of in terms of the disorder thing. I mean, what do you make of some of the headlines about New York? How realistic is the crime situation there?
Right. I mean, I think I get a lot of questions from friends about what the crime is like, and do you even ride the subway? I ride the subway multiple times a day, by the way. I'm not saying that there haven't been bad things that happen on my line, but I find it to be relatively safe. I get on the subway, I get to work, I come home, and I do this every day. As you said, love walking around the city. I mean, it's just such a great city to be walking around, a lot of energy. And as far as comparing it to Seattle, I find that the homelessness really isn't in your face here. It's not as much as you would see in Seattle, I think. So for whatever policies that the different cities have, I find New York to be a relatively safe place. And if you were to ever run into trouble, there's always people around. So that's nice too.
Yeah, it's like New York's so big that you do have a crime issue, but it's spread out more than Seattle, where it's like all on 2 city blocks and very in your face. And, New York has the right to shelter law, which makes it, I think, a little bit different because people aren't on the streets as visible. But anyway, so obviously we used to be on Fox 13, Q13 together. What have you been doing since then? Tell people about this gig of yours.
Right. So I took the opportunity to move to New York. I have always wanted to be here, and I'm a business correspondent for this great startup called Straight Arrow News. And I came on before we had really launched the platform in general. And the mission alone of just like, we're going to give you this unbiased network, that there are too many news networks out there that are, really leaning to one side or the other. And there's not as much out there for people who are looking for straight down the middle news. So we like to tell it like it is and let viewers decide for themselves what the information is. And so I just thought that was kind of a dream to be able to do that, sign on to that kind of mission, and to come to New York City and live here and talk about business, which I don't think a lot of people know, but even going up through school, I double concentrated in broadcast and business journalism. So this is really a part of my heart. And I love to be able to explain so many different topics about, trying to make it easy for people to understand. And I think that there's no more important topic than finance for people to feel more accessible in this space. So I love being able to break it down like that.
It's also just a hell of a time, though, to be covering business and the economy with everything going on.
I call it job security for me.
Yes, so job security is a good way to look at it. But it's fascinating how political things get and how you can look at the same situation like, let's say, gas prices. And depending on what side of the aisle you're on, you find different people to blame entirely. So I guess, how do you navigate when your mission is to just give it to people straight? How do you navigate the inherent kind of politics that come into issues like that, like gas prices and inflation?
Well, we don't ignore those opinions, right? We don't ignore where those things are coming from. It's a matter of cutting through the political BS, if you will, and explaining to people exactly what's happening. It's the same thing with inflation. I mean, I think it's very catchy to call it Biden inflation, but like, whose responsibility is it now to bring inflation down? And that really comes down to actions that the Fed can take at this point. There's very little the president of the United States is going to be able to do at this point to bring down inflation in the immediate term. So trying to explain to people how things actually work. I think something that got really political too was when the Q2 numbers came out for GDP, and they were negative for the second quarter in a row. And it was all this recession talk. And I remember doing a piece, and it's like, at the end of the day, however you feel about what a recession is colloquially or, officially, whether it's the NBER that classifies a recession, does it matter if people are hurting? Does it matter what you call it at this point? Does it matter if it actually qualifies as a recession? If American families are struggling to fill up their cars, are struggling to feed their families, like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what really matters versus people yelling at each other across the political aisle.
Exactly. And that's the exact message we had on Divided, which was basically like, at the end of the day, your best barometer for how the economy is doing is how American families are doing. And you just see people trying to get political points by being able to label things X, Y, or Z. But, I think especially in an important election year, with the midterms coming up, there is a desire to know, okay, how did gas prices get to this point? How did inflation get so bad? And so on things like that, I mean, can you find clear culprits, with inflation, for example? And there's the talk about all the spending that Democrats passed during the pandemic and as we were getting out of the pandemic. How much does that contribute to what Americans are seeing, in the cost at the grocery store, et cetera?
The stimulus is certainly a factor, but remember, the stimulus did start under Republican administrations, and this was a bipartisan effort to put this money into the economy. And we're talking about this now in hindsight, right? if we could go back and change the way that we responded to the pandemic and how much we put into the economy to recover from that very extreme, very quick recession, maybe as a country, we would have done things a little bit differently. But inflation was starting to pick up anyway because we had all this stimulus. And then you just add more stimulus on top of it, and it kind of continues to tumble. Something that people don't talk about is that right now there are certain states that have parties or control in both parties that are passing other types of stimulus for their residents. Who knew? Giving money away is a very popular thing for voters, whether you're a Republican voter or a Democrat voter. So we see governors from both parties right now in states that are still putting money out into the economy. And as someone who, does this every day, my only question is, really, did we not learn from this? Did we not learn that this economic stimulus really put us in a position where spending got out of control? Unfortunately, we're really at this point where the Fed is looking at the economy and trying to cripple it in a way to bring down inflation. And it really comes down to saying, we're going to have to bring pain to households so that they stop spending, so that demand goes down, so that inflation goes down. And that's tough. That's really tough to tell people that we're going to put the country into a recession, essentially. They say they want a soft landing, but it's becoming more and more unlikely that people are going to lose their jobs because we need people to stop spending so that prices will go down.
And that's why, when the Biden administration came out and they said, hey, we're going to go forward with student debt forgiveness, from a business reporter perspective, what aspects of that decision did you focus on?
Specifically that it's not going to solve the problem of student debt. This is a one-time shot that, sure, is going to give relief to millions of Americans. I would say that the majority of people who are seeing their student loans go away, or at least part of it going away, they haven't been making payments for 2.5 years now. So it's not like all of a sudden they have this student loan payment that they get to shuck out into the economy. So it's not going to have as big of an impact as people think. And I think all of the analyses say the same thing, that inflation prices might go up 0.1%, 0.2%. It has very little effect on it. But it's not addressing the core root of the problem. So that's been the biggest thing from a financial perspective, that this is a one-time shot and we still have a lot of work to do because borrowers are hurting.
When you talk about business reporting and reporting on the economy, talking about the Fed and interest rates and the impact of student debt and what causes inflation, these are all highly complex issues that have a variety of contributing factors. How do you, I don't want to say dumb it down, but you and I have been in news for a long time, and the most effective people are people who can relay the necessary information without treating viewers like they're stupid, but also understand that not everybody gets economic issues and business issues to the extent that someone like you does. So how do you find that balance of, being able to relay information to viewers, but also kind of keeping it simple?
Well, look, I'm not reporting for CNBC, where if I were, I would be catering my reports to avid investors, right? I'm trying to reach that general audience that may not be as comfortable talking about finance as people who are actively investing in the market. And so my biggest goal is just to get people to a point of understanding, to get people to fear these terms, to fear these themes a little bit less. If you can understand something, then you can wrap your head around it. It becomes a little less scary. This is a scary time in the economy. I, feel for that, and I experienced that myself. But if you can understand what's happening a little bit more, it makes the boogeyman aspect of it go away. And so that's always my goal and my approach walking into it. And luckily, I'm, surrounded by people on my team who aren't financial reporters. And so I turn to them. Does this make sense to you? And can we put this out? And does this have, the effect that I'm looking for?
Yeah, I was curious kind of what the barometer is for that in terms of, because we've heard a lot of organizations pop up, news orgs over the last couple of years that are like, we're going to be straight down the middle news. I look at News Nation, for instance, which now they're being criticized for maybe going too far to the right, which I don't know who's making that judgment. But what is your guys' barometer for whether you're kind of fulfilling your mission to be kind of straight down the middle?
I think that it's less about both sidesism or anything, and just being critical of all sides. So really taking that critical spotlight on something that would be considered a left issue, something that would be considered a right issue, and making sure that we're being fair in that. And we have these conversations every morning. And we have a team that's very diverse in their political thoughts and backgrounds. And that's exciting too, is to be able to have those conversations, because newsrooms like to say that they have it, but I would say that we really do have it in our newsroom. And I think it's important right now to be having these conversations together and coming up with stories and angles that we all feel are going to benefit the public.
Yeah, that's what newsrooms totally fall short of. They're looking to diversify, which I think is important. I don't think you should have a staff of all like white people who grew up upper middle class, but also, you need to have diversity of thought and diversity of economic background to be able to, I think, really serve your viewers the best. And so I'm glad to hear that you guys have focused on that. I'm saying, yeah, we want diversity of thought. We want people with different opinions. How do you guys reach, how do most people consume Straight Arrow?
So it's straightarrownews.com. We have obviously our website, and then you can find us on all of the social media channels. So we are a digital first platform. You and I are both now post TV, and it's a fun space to be because you can really stretch your muscles a little bit more in the space. So obviously Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we have a big TikTok following. So we do a lot of different things across all of the social media platforms, and then find us on our website, straightarrownews.com.
Speaking of that quickly, as we kind of wrap up, post TV, the last time I think a lot of viewers in Seattle would have seen you, you were in the thick of it in the 2020 riots. That was a really challenging time physically and mentally for both of us out covering these things. What is it like to make that transition from, the climate that you were in reporting in Seattle to now focusing on business and the economy?
As complicated as the economy is, it's been a breath of fresh air to get out of that environment and to get out of basically trauma reporting for a really long period of time. So this was a conscious decision on my part to come and do this. I didn't just fall into this. I was looking for something where I could live a better life. I was consumed by the news in Seattle, and I know that you were as well. And, not just on a personal, like, oh, I couldn't stop watching it, but like we gave everything. And now I find a lot of purpose in what I'm doing now. And I did find a lot of purpose in local news and working in Seattle and working for that market. And I think we did a lot of really good work. But I'm loving the balance now.
Yeah, balance is really important, and you get to do what you love, but also, not get, assaulted in riots, which is always, not get mobbed by angry crowds, which is always a plus. Well, Simone, it's so nice to see you, and you just look so bright and vibrant and happy, and your dog's doing good, and your husband's doing well.
I don't know if you heard him in the background. He decided that our interview was a good time to start playing with a toy, but yeah, everything's great. We always have our roots still in Seattle. I know people think I kind of just took off, but Daniel still works out there in Puyallup, and, we have this lovely little life here in New York as well. So it's been good. It's been really good. And I, love to consider, you a friend that I get to keep forever. And, Q13 gave us that.
Yeah, we both managed to survive Seattle media, at least for the time being. All right, Simone, thanks for being on Fridays with Friends.
Thanks for having me.
We usually end the show on Fridays with our segment Understanding America, where we read an important text or document from American history. I want to end with nothing specific, but just an overall message. We started the show by talking about Governor Jay Inslee just clinging to his emergency powers for dear life after more than 900 days, despite the fact that it seems like the emergency was done a long time ago.
It has been a journey. When this started, we knew so little about this virus, but we knew something very profound, and that was it threatened the lives of millions of Washingtonians. Over the next 2.5 years, I exercised the authority granted by the legislature to issue 85 emergency orders to save lives in the state of Washington. And that was and is our priority, is to save lives in the state of Washington. Each one was tailored to do that, and I'm pleased to report that they have been significantly effective.
And I know there are people out there who don't get the big deal. who don't understand why it's a big deal, who don't see how it impacts their life. And truthfully, at this point, his remaining dictates really don't impact many of our lives anyway. Certainly not the things that are a result of his continuing state of emergency. But try to appreciate and understand the principle of the matter. The fact that this is not how our government was designed to function. Our nation and our government were specifically designed to ensure that one person didn't have too much power. And ask yourself, is a governor getting broad authority for more than 900 days? Is a governor who is able to, through that authority, cut the legislature out of decision-making during an emergency for 900 days? Is that the way that you want your government to operate if someone who you don't like is in power? To me, it shouldn't matter who the politician is. It shouldn't matter if you like them, if you don't like them, if you support them, if you don't support them. The fact of the matter is, this is not how our American system is supposed to work. Now, is Governor Jay Inslee violating state law by continuing a state of emergency this long? No. But again, it's the principle of the matter. And it is obvious that something needs to be done to change state law, to ensure that if we have a situation like this in the future, that our directly elected representatives in the state house and the state senate can have a larger say in how we respond to a situation like a pandemic, as opposed to all the power resting with one person. That's it for this episode of Undivided. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining in my dance party at the beginning. Seriously disappointed that we have to wait until October 31st for the state of emergency to lift. But I suppose Governor Jay Inslee keeping his emergency powers this long is a pretty scary thing, so maybe it's appropriate to end it on Halloween. All right, if you have not become an Undivided subscriber already, please do so. We do a bonus episode like this every single Wednesday. You can do that at patreon.com/undivided or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Undivided is presented by our founding sponsor, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com.